Right. Hello. Welcome, everyone. It is good to see you here today. This is the session that's offered by Disability and Accessibility Resources about supporting your students' transition to read. Today's session is being recorded so that we can share this information with community members who couldn't join us today. So I will start by introducing myself. My name is Jess Gibson. I am the Assistant Director of Disability and Accessibility Resources, and I use she, her pronouns. We know that you probably have lots of questions about the fall semester, so we would encourage you to maybe check out some of the other orientation sessions as well. There are some being offered by Student Support Services, the Health and Counseling Center, some on academics, so you will be well informed. I'm going to be facilitating today's panel on the topic of accommodations and support for students who have disabilities. I am joined by colleagues and I will have them introduce themselves now. So please share your name, your role at the college, and your pronouns if you're so inclined, starting with Teresa.
Thank you, Jess. My name is Teresa Lowry, and I am the Director of Disability and Accessibility Resources, going into my 9th year at Reed, but I've been doing this work for about 15, 16 years now. I use she, her pronouns, and I supervise Jess and am supervised by Julie Maxfield, who will introduce herself now. Are you there, Julie?
Sorry, hi. I'm screen sharing and wasn't expecting to introduce myself, so I don't have my video on. But I will say, my name is Julie Maxfield. I'm the Associate Dean of Students. I use she, her pronouns. In addition to overseeing the excellent work of Disability and Accessibility Resources, I also connect to academic support programs and international student services. And that's it.
All right. To get started, I will give an overview for today's session. So Julie, if you could advance us. We will start with an overview of the support services that we offer to our students, and then we're going to go over some of the questions that were pre-submitted to the panel. If you have any new questions that you would like to submit, please send those to me, Jess, in a private message in the chat box, and I'll be monitoring the chat for questions. I should add that we can answer questions about our process or our resources generally, but if you have a question that's very specific to your student, we might recommend scheduling a phone appointment or sending us an email just so that we can be mindful of your student's privacy. We're going to aim to wrap up by 3:55, and we'll let you know later about how to follow up with us if you have questions after the session. So now I'm going to hand it over to Teresa to give us an overview of the services that we provide at DAR.
Thank you. So who we are is a team that works in the academic support building called the Dojo at Reed campus. There's 3 of us that work in DAR. So myself as director, Jess, who you're also meeting today as the assistant director, and then Josanne Quitta, who is our behind the scenes wizard who helps to implement the accommodations. She does everything from hiring the note takers, monitoring the alternate format texts, working to secure specialized seating, room assignments, all that kind of thing. So essentially, if you're a student or you do have questions, you can contact any one of us, and if we're not the right person to answer the question, we can certainly get you in touch with somebody who can. Our main goal in Disability Accessibility Resources is to work with students who have medical or mental health conditions or learning differences that impact their student life. They may need some kind of support, service, or adjustments in the classrooms, like we call them accommodations, in order to have equal access to the programs and resources that Reed offers. Our primary goals are a little different than perhaps they were in the K through 12, but ultimately it's about access and inclusion and providing opportunities to fully access the Reed program, both educationally and in their extracurricular or residential life. Currently, Reed has about 20% of our students using some type of accommodation through our program. Again, those may be students that are registered with us and using accommodations consistently every semester. It could also be students that are registered with us, use them when they need them, maybe heavily in the first year, and then develop their own systems for addressing their learning differences or their needs over time. It really is dependent on the student to request the accommodations each semester for those courses or supports that they're going to be needing. We work with mental health issues such as bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, social anxiety, OCD, quite the range of mental health concerns, chronic medical condition, learning differences or learning disabilities, hearing or visual sensory impairments, and students that are on the spectrum as well. The definition of the disability is something that has a significant impact on a major life activity. That may be breathing, that may be walking, that may be learning, that may be, living on campus. We do it in a very individualized process to help students kind of navigate, and we'll talk more about that in a minute or two. But we do offer accommodations in the area of academic and classroom usage, housing or residential life, PE accommodations, or other accommodations if a student is finding that there are some barriers they're encountering while here at Reed. It's very individualized, as I said. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. We usually start with a conversation and ask questions and go from there. Real briefly, common accommodations that may have been used in high school or used previously could include extra time for testing in a private environment, having a note taker, having your textbooks in a digital or audio format. Those are just some of the more heavily used accommodations, but we'll talk more specifically about those in a minute. We want to say thank you to all of you that submitted your questions in advance, and we will work our way systematically through those. And as Jess mentioned, if you have other questions that do come up, please feel free to shoot us a note here in this program, or follow up with an email to one of us in our department. We'll happily follow up with you then. So the first question we want to address is this. My student had a 504 or IEP, an individualized education plan, in high school and used accommodations when they were there. Do accommodations work the same way in college? Excellent question. As I alluded to, they are a little bit different. So the laws that govern accessibility and support for students with disabilities in K through 12 are based on IDEA in the K through 12 system. That is about ensuring student success in the classroom, putting people in the least restrictive environment. There's a whole school, literally school of ideas around IDEA and how that works in the public or private schools. When you get into higher education, our foundational laws are around the American with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. So they're a little bit different. We don't guarantee success, but we do everything we can to support your students and connecting with other resources that work with student success. Our primary goal is ensuring access. So our accommodations might differ perhaps somewhat from what students had when they were in high school. That's one of the main things that we need to keep in mind is the laws are different. The goals of those laws are somewhat different, but they're all still in the spirit of providing access and inclusion for our students. One of the other big things to know about is just because a student had a 504 plan or an IEP when they're in high school, doesn't mean they will automatically have the same types of accommodations in high school, or they had in high school, that they'll get the same ones when they come to college. So that's where our individualized intake process kicks in, and we'll work with the student to determine what's going to be most useful and necessary moving forward. Sometimes they are the same, and sometimes they differ slightly. The other big thing we like to stress for new families and new students in the college environment is a lot more does fall independently to the students in terms of requesting accommodations. So we don't have necessarily an IEP team tracking down our students, advocating in every single classroom. We really rely more and more as students are getting more mature and becoming young adults to let us know if there's problems and let us know what accommodations they need. So we help students get set up, we help them navigate the process, especially in a first year or a transition year coming to Reed for the first time. But students will need to request their accommodations once they are set up in our system every semester because their classes change, their professors change, sometimes their conditions change, and we want to make sure that people who need to be notified in the classroom have that information. So those are the big things I just wanted to highlight about the difference between 504 and IEP plans and the accommodations process at college. Jess?
Mm-hmm. One of the questions we received was, how do students request accommodations at Reed? It's a pretty simple process to get started for students. It all starts out with filling out an accommodation request form. So there you can see here that there is a screenshot of our web page. And over there on the right, you'll see three kind of square buttons. One says request academic accommodations, one says request housing, and one says schedule an appointment. So clicking on either the academic or housing request buttons would take the student to the appropriate form that they need to fill out. So filling out that form is basically the way to get the student in touch with our office. And from there, we will be following up with them via email to say, great, we got your form, here's your next step. The next step usually involves submitting some kind of medical documentation to our office. Students can submit documentation right along with their accommodation request form. They'll be given the opportunity to upload their documentation, but if they don't have it right then, if they need to take some time to gather the documentation, they can send it to us via email or fax. And providers, mental or physical healthcare providers, also send us documentation directly to our office, and that's fine as well. If you have questions about what exactly should be included on the documentation, we also have a web page that has pretty detailed information about our guidelines. And students who maybe they're just not quite sure if their documentation meets the criteria, we would say just send it to us anyway. Let's just get started. We can, review it and take it from there with the student. There may be some additional information we need, but we wouldn't want, a student's questions about that to stop them from connecting with us. We do also offer informational meetings. So if a student isn't sure if our office is the right one for them or if their disability would qualify for accommodations, they can just schedule a brief, 30-minute, it wouldn't even have to take 30 minutes, but they can schedule a time to speak with me or Teresa on the phone or video to just talk through what the process is and how we can help them get started. The third part is once we have that form and we have some documentation, then we meet with students one-on-one for an intake meeting. This semester, we are offering the intake meetings via phone or video. And that's a time for us to really talk to the student about their individual experience and how a disability has impacted them as a student, what accommodations they think they might need. If they have used accommodations in the past, we can talk about what was helpful, what wasn't. Students might not always, be fully aware of what accommodations they will need, what may or may not be helpful. And so during that meeting, we can also talk a little bit more about, well, tell me how it impacts you. What does it look like for you? How does it manifest itself in these different settings? And then if Teresa or I have ideas for accommodations that could be helpful, we can suggest them. The intake meeting typically only happens once, and then after that, students use our DAR student portal to manage their accommodations for their classes online. And actually, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so I'll pause now because Teresa is going to talk now a little bit about how faculty are involved and how we notify faculty.
Great. So question is, how are faculty notified about the accommodations? As I mentioned earlier, a lot more falls to the student to request the accommodations, and they will need to do that each and every semester. So what Jess was outlining is sort of the intake process. Students go through that upon getting set up, but what we will do with them is identify those accommodations that they're eligible for, and then ask the students at the beginning of each semester, they'll get nudges and reminders from us, to log in and request what they need for each specific class. So as Jess mentioned, on our portal or on our website, we call it the DAR, Disability Accessibility Resources Portal. And that's really where we manage accommodations, communications with students, how our office communicates with faculty or Res Life if there are accommodations needed there. So what will happen is once a student has been approved for accommodations, the accommodations will be listed in the portal. They would log in at the beginning of each semester and their course schedule will pop up, and then their list of accommodations will be there as well. And they can go through and customize to a certain degree which accommodations they need for which classes out of those accommodations they've been deemed eligible. So maybe what they need for orchestra looks really different than what they need for humanities, which could look really different from what they need for organic chemistry labs. So it allows them to customize, like I said, to make sure that what they need in those different types of formats or different types of classes are reflected in the accommodation letters that our office send out. So once a student does that, they go through, identify their classes and what they need for each class. Our office approves those and we send a letter out to the faculty. The letter itself is delivered online. The student will get a copy of it at the same time that it goes out to faculty, so they know what it says and they'll know when and where it was delivered. And it'll outline our obligations as an institution under the ADA, but primarily it will list the accommodations that student has requested for that specific course. Once that letter goes out, it doesn't say anything about the specific disability or reason why a student is using accommodations. It just lists they are indeed eligible for these accommodations based on their process and having gone through our office. When the faculty are notified, as I mentioned, the students will also be notified that the letter's gone out. And we strongly encourage and ask that students and faculty then meet together to talk about any specific arrangements for their class. So for example, if a student is getting extra time on a test, they'll need to figure out with their professor where and when they're going to take that test, when they're going to pick it up, when they're going to drop it off, more of the logistical kinds of questions. If they're having an accommodation such as flexibility on attendance or flexibility on due date, that's a really important conversation to have at the beginning of the semester to help clarify expectations, to talk about how the accommodations are going to interface with the class policies and guidelines. And it's much easier to have those conversations in advance of actually needing them than it is to realize you're sick or incapacitated and having to figure it all out in the moment. So that's why we really stress that students should be having those conversations in advance with faculty. Our faculty are well versed in having these conversations. As we mentioned at the introduction, over 20% of our students use accommodations. So odds are faculty have had students with accommodations in their classes. We do faculty training, we do faculty outreach. We are available for faculty as a resource as well. So if a student ever got an accommodation and the professor was wondering how that might work in their class, maybe they're new to read or they never had a specific type of accommodation, Jess and I are readily available to talk with them about how that could look or how to work with the student in those cases. I spend a little bit of time on that because I know sometimes that's a piece that can be a little intimidating for students, but it's really an important stage in terms of students being able to clarify both expectations and just the logistical aspects of their accommodation in any given class. And the final thing I'll just say about that is we as staff are available to help as needed. So maybe it's helping a professor look at a situation or accommodation creatively, figuring out how it's going to work in their classroom. Maybe a student went and had a faculty conversation, but they're not sure where it landed or not sure the professor truly understood, or they walk out of the meeting not sure what the next steps are. They can always loop back to DAR and we will help to clarify that or follow up with faculty where and when needed.
Okay. And let's see, yes, here we go. So now we received a question that was, besides accommodations, what other resources might be useful for my student? Reed has a lot to offer. One of the resources that we offer within our department is short-term coaching. So that might look like a student meeting one-on-one with either me or Teresa for a few weeks when they first transition to Reed, especially a student who might be a little overwhelmed with how much newness there is, new things to set up and start tracking. So those can be weekly check-ins to say, how's it going? Have you, remembered to check in on this? What can I help you with? Then we also do more specific, coaching around, I'm studying a lot for my math courses, but I'm just not performing that well on my math tests. Or, gosh, I've noticed that it's really hard for me to keep track of all my different assignments and get started on those long-term projects. So we can meet with students for a few weeks at a time to provide them some coaching support. And then as Teresa mentioned, we also are here on an ongoing basis, really if students have any questions about their accommodations or academic challenges generally. We also have an academic support office that's available to all Reed students. So those who are using accommodations through DAR, as well as every other student at Reed. They also offer some coaching. They have a great peer tutoring program, and they periodically offer workshops. So those are really helpful for students to keep their eye out for those. Faculty at Reed are very available. Students have access to their faculty advisors, and professors offer office hours on a regular basis. And finally, our Health and Counseling Center also has both a medical side and a medical side and a mental health side. So we have providers for both. The HCC tends to provide, I guess on the medical side, sort of basic services, and then specialty care might be referred off campus. And then on the mental health side, they offer crisis or short-term counseling. And then again, probably students who have need more specialized or ongoing care might be connected with a local provider in the Portland area. And there is also a case manager at the Health and Counseling Center who can help students who are seeking a local provider. We do often get questions about medication management. For those, we would refer you to the HCC. I think they also offer an orientation session this week. They do offer some prescribing services, but sort of exactly, what their criteria is, what types of things they're able to prescribe might vary from one student to the next. So I would refer you to contact them if you have questions about your individual student's needs. And then, yeah, I see. Next slide is Teresa. What can I do to support my student during their transition to read? And I'll just add that we're going to be having a few slides on this topic. We have some wonderful ideas to offer.
Thanks, Jess. I also just want to acknowledge we are throwing a lot of information your way, so I apologize. This is a new format for us and feel like we're talking at you, whereas usually we're in person and having a little more of a rapport develop over the course of time. So thanks for bearing with us. I know it's a lot of information, and I don't mean to overwhelm you, nor does Jess, but we're trying to get as many of these questions answered as we can so that we can move into conversation later or as follow-ups. One thing we didn't mention that I did want to just highlight for everyone is that while we set up accommodations in these initial intake meetings and we work to implement them at the beginning of each semester, students can request accommodations at any point in time. Maybe they want to start the semester off and realize, I don't know if I want to use accommodations or not, I'd like to try it without. If after that first round of midterms, they realize, maybe accommodations would have been helpful, they can request or activate them at that time. The other thing is that often in the first year, students may or may not know what they need. And so they have never had note-taking support before, so they don't think they need it, but they get into a lecture-based course and realize there's a lot of information coming at them in there and that note-taking could be helpful. They can email us, they can talk to Jess in a coaching appointment, or they can just pick up the phone and schedule an appointment with us, and we can revise those accommodations or modify and adjust as need be based on the student's feedback of what's working or potentially not working for them. So that's really important for everyone to understand too. Just because you met with us once, nothing's set in stone. We engage in this reflective process with students throughout their time at Reed, and sometimes changes are needed. So to get on to the next question, which Jess just raised, is sort of a separate, the next phase of this presentation is really to talk about how do you as a parent or as a guardian or as a person just caring about a college age student, what can you do to support your student during their transitions to Reed? So one of the things I usually start with talking with families about is that the parent role is transitioning too. Most likely you've done a lot to help get your student to this point. Many students with disabilities have challenges throughout their K through 12 experience. You've probably been involved in IEP meetings or lining up additional tutoring, back and forth to doctors or counseling appointments. And you as a parent may have had a more direct role in problem solving in the past. Now things are shifting and your role turns into one of being more supportive and thinking about how to help your student develop those skills so they can navigate the challenges ahead, how they can problem solve when something is confronting them that's new or challenging or scary on campus. Who do they need to go to talk to if they're having a problem? Helping them learn to navigate and self-advocate is really part of that adulting skill that we're hoping all students are expanding on and developing in. And so in realizing that, your role as a direct advocate for your student in that K through 12 system might begin to feel different. The hope is that by the time they're a senior and writing their thesis, they'll be readily able to identify what their needs are or come back to see us and talk through, this has been really helpful up to this point, but I'm encountering something new in my thesis writing. Or I don't think I really need accommodations anymore. Thanks, it's been great, but I don't need them for this semester. Our goal is to take a developmental approach in supporting our students. And we're asking parents to kind of reflect on that as well, to figure out what role is needed, what role you can play, and what kind of support your student is really truly needing at any given point in time during their time at Reed. So one of the biggest things that parents can do to support their students as they're struggling or encountering barriers at Reed is to help your student creatively problem solve. One of the roles you can take on as a parent is helping your student identify what it is they need. If they're struggling, you can ask them additional questions, trying to get at the heart of what's most impacting their stress or their feelings of overwhelm. That may be when you get the phone call is when a student is feeling a little overwhelmed, or this is just really hard, or I didn't know it would be this challenging, or something else has happened. I know as a parent of college age students, that's when I get the phone calls. And so the tendency as a parent sometimes is to go, oh my gosh, was this ever a good choice? And what was I thinking? That's what I experienced anyway. And I have to step back and think through that, well, they're reaching out because they are feeling overwhelmed. We as parents can be a safe harbor in that role. But maybe it's not our role to jump in and call the professor on the student's behalf, or our role to call the disability office and navigate a new accommodation. One of the things that you can do instead is maybe just listen, be a supportive person, and help the student identify by breaking that sense of overwhelm down into, well, what is it that's overwhelming? Is it the classwork? Is it the too many responsibilities on their plate this weekend? Is it a roommate problem? Helping them kind of break it down so that then once the problem is identified, you can go into some creative problem solving with them. Another time, like I said, just to keep in mind is sometimes your student just needs to vent. So I've gotten phone calls on a Friday night, and then it takes me all weekend to get back to my son, and by Monday it's resolved itself, or he's off and running or heading off to class with a friend and everything's okay. So sometimes we will hear from our students when they're having a low point or when they're feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes it's just a situation of the moment, and sometimes it does call for some creative problem solving of sort of dissecting that sense of overwhelm or frustration to figure out what's happening and what might be needed as a next step. Once that happens, one of your goals could be to help them then make a plan. Is the plan to talk to the faculty member? Is the plan to get back on the counseling schedule and start seeing about getting counseling again on a semi-regular basis? Maybe it's needing to check back in with DAR because their accommodations aren't really meeting their needs. They don't have to know what that need is, but they could come and talk to Jess or I, and we can help them kind of tease that apart and identify needs for them and the resources that they need on campus.
Oh, Julie, sorry. I
So as
think we're
Jess
still
mentioned,
under.
there's a lot of different sessions that are happening. We good?
Oh, yep. Okay. Yep. We're good.
Okay. So I was just going to say that there's a lot of different sessions that will be happening during orientation that both parents and students can take advantage of. And we would encourage you to soak up as much as you can during this time, but don't hesitate to call or email those questions if after a few days you need some additional reminding or clarity around where to go with resources and questions.
Okay. Another thing that you can do as a parent is, or as someone who, as Teresa said, is a guardian, or just someone who cares about and loves and is supporting students who are in college at the moment, encouraging a holistic approach to wellness. Some students with disabilities might be working twice as hard as other students just in general to manage a lot of different things in life, and might just sort of get into the zone of, I just have to focus on my classes, this is what I'm here for, and they may need some additional encouragement to maybe branch out and focus on other aspects of their experience. One of the things that we hear from students really helps make their college experience satisfying is developing relationships. So, and that could be, a wide range. It could be connecting with a professor who has, a shared area of interest, or maybe a staff member at the Multicultural Resource Center. Certainly, their pod mates or their classmates, but just finding, a way to connect with people. Which is going to look a little bit different this fall than it will usually, but we're going to have, Reed will still have lots of opportunities and ways that we're going to be encouraging connections. Or another one is hobbies. So, encouraging your student to maybe take some time to do something that energizes them and that they're passionate about. Maybe that's connecting with other students at Reed who are virtual gamers, or it could be maybe taking some virtual guitar lessons on the side, or getting outside perhaps to go for a walk in the Reed Canyon. Getting outside might be a little, again, that might look different these days, but the Reed Canyon is beautiful. Right across the street, there's rhododendron gardens that students can go. So just, again, thinking about wellness a little bit beyond just, what do I have to do right now? And then also broadening their perspective a little bit. sometimes students have a hard time seeing beyond their current experience. They just might be so focused on the here and now that it can be helpful to hear another perspective, to place their experience within a broader context. So that might look like, discussing current events together, what's happening around the world. Again, it might look like, pursuing some hobbies, or maybe helping the student to connect with the Center for Life Beyond Read to explore jobs and internships. But really anything that can just kind of help them realize that this experience, while important, is also just one of the many that they're going to have over the course of their life. And okay, Teresa, developing a communications plan.
Yeah, that's one of the things we encourage families to talk about if you haven't already, maybe during this orientation week. Really having a pointed conversation about what are the expectations around communications plan. And that's going to look different for every family, given, what your current communication plan is. Maybe that's what you want to continue on when you get to college. Maybe it looks a little bit different. But you might want to explore how often you hope to hear from your student, or you would expect to hear from your student. At what point will you as a parent become worried if you haven't heard from them? If you're texting them and they're not responding, explaining to them what that feels like on your perspective, your head might go if that's a concern of yours. Maybe you have check-ins every Sunday night and that's what you do and that's enough, and that feels comfortable both for you and for your student. It might be also helpful to look at it from the flip side. As a parent, what do you expect? But what's your child comfortable with? What are they hoping will be the level of access they have to you? That's just a good thing to kind of as a baseline explore as a family, so that nobody's falling through the cracks or feeling the expectations might look really different, that you're thinking you're going to get an email or a text every night, but they think the Sunday night plan sounds great and they're off doing their thing. Having a communications plan set up ahead of time, or at least just starting that conversation, can help alleviate some anxiety or confusion around staying in touch and letting people know if there are problems or challenges, or sharing something really great that's been happening for them at Reed. Another resource that we wanted to mention and let you as a parent know about is the care team. And again, this is something that will likely be talked about in other avenues on campus during orientation. But we do have a care team coordinated through the Dean of Students office, and there's a referral form for anyone who is concerned about a student or concerned about your child. You can fill that out and let the Dean's office know. You can then expect that a professional staff member at Reed will coordinate, who coordinates the care and support for students, will follow up and reach out either to you or to the student to connect them in a way that feels meaningful based on the issues that are coming up. Once that reach out has happened, the idea behind the care team is that it's a network of professionals from across campus that can identify who maybe already has a standing relationship with a student, or if it's an issue that somebody's expressed a concern about how things are going in Res Life, it might be somebody from Res Life that's designated as the follow-up. There is a website for the care team, and there's also the referral form or concern form on there that a parent or another student or a faculty member who is experiencing some concern for a student for any particular reason can fill that out, and the person best positioned to provide that support for the student.
Okay. I think that is all that we had in terms of the pre-submitted questions. So now we have time for some questions and answers, a little Q&A, and we can turn it over to the questions that we've received in the chat box. So let's see here. One of the questions that we received was, let me see, I think it's kind of a two-part question. It involves, is DAR or is Reed taking the pandemic into account when we are assessing students' accommodation needs? So for example, if a first-year student is not going to be guaranteed housing during the second semester, but it would be very difficult for them to manage off campus, could they apply for a housing accommodation to remain on campus? So I think what I'm hearing there is, and first of all, I want to clarify, I don't think that Reed has any plans to change first-year students' access to housing. So I believe if they have housing in the fall on campus, they will also have housing in the spring on campus if all students are on campus. But I think generally what it's getting to is what if my student's accommodation needs change, and are you taking other things into account? And the answer is yes. If a student's accommodation needs change, maybe because circumstances have changed, maybe because they are, experiencing new symptoms, or they've developed a completely different condition, or maybe they didn't even realize that a certain accommodation was going to be needed, they can absolutely connect with us at some point later in the semester or in the year, and we can take a look at their updated accommodation about eligibility at that time. And then part two is, are we taking the pandemic into account as we are working with students in their accommodation needs? And I would again say yes. We understand that things are different right now. In some ways, the work that we do hasn't changed much, but in others, for example, we've heard from some students who have had a slightly more difficult time getting some documentation from their medical provider. So we realize that, and we've adapted our processes somewhat to be able to meet students where they're at right now. And then I will see if Teresa would like to contribute anything else for that, either just questions around COVID and accommodations or students changing accommodation needs.
Sure, and I apologize, I'm going to audio only at this point. My internet's a little unstable and I'll be able to stay with you through the end, so here we go. I would just add to what Jess was saying that COVID has exacerbated conditions for a lot of our students. Students may be experiencing stress or anxiety, may have an exacerbation of that experience. So we're really encouraging students to connect with us if their accommodation needs have changed during this time of COVID, if specific accommodations might be needed, and to reflect back to us if going to an online course versus an in-person course has created some new challenges or difficulties. I think the one other thing we heard in terms of feedback in the spring was students who were working at home perhaps for the first time and needed some assistance in setting up a work from my dorm room or work from my home work environment. So again, there may be times that coaching could be really helpful just to kind of help troubleshoot or give them some helpful suggestions during the COVID challenges that they're encountering.
Thank you. Another question that we received was, how do you access the resources offered by academic support? Academic support has a website where students can schedule a coaching session with a staff member. They can also use it to schedule a one-on-one peer tutoring session. And on the website, they should also be able to find information about drop-in tutoring, as well as workshops or, I guess, trainings that are offered. And pretty much any student can just go onto their website and sign up for anything that looks good to them. And I should clarify, the coaching that we offer through DAR is typically only offered to students who are already in some way registered with us or working with our program. Tends to be a little more hands-on and applied coaching, especially for students who have executive function stuff going on for them. And it looks like Julie has just placed the webpage for academic support into the chat. So you are welcome to check it out there. Okay. I am not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment, so I will just wait a few seconds to allow time for anyone who may be typing as I speak to see if there are any other questions. I don't think so. In that case, again, as I mentioned, if you do have a question that's particular to your student, or if oh, we do have one more question. Who are the professionals who work in disability and accessibility resources? There are three of us, myself, Teresa, and Josanne, who is our accommodations coordinator. Teresa and I are mainly the point people who meet with students one-on-one to discuss their accommodation needs. And Josanne is really the person who's implementing and coordinating all of the accommodations, such as note-taking services, to make sure that those are in place for students. And I would say that while we are the staff who are sort of dedicated to supporting students with disabilities, there is a very, very broad range of support staff at Reed in other areas as well. And again, you are welcome to contact us via email. Our email is dar@reed.edu. We also offer 30-minute informational appointments that, for family members or people who are supporting students. So any one of you is welcome to schedule one of those if you have additional questions that you'd like to follow up on. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for attending. We are very excited to be meeting your students this fall, and we wish you and them a great fall semester. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.